All right. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the last lecture for Intro to Ethics. I just want to say it really has been my great pleasure being your instructor this semester. I feel so honored to have been able to teach this class to you. I thought very long about wanting to do this thing, which is teaching ethics, and I feel very blessed and very privileged to have had the opportunity to do that for you this semester. And I'm so grateful to all of you for having been such great students and for being so charitable with me when there were technical issues um, on getting grades in. That all of you were engaging with this content and were willing to be vulnerable enough to tell me how you made sense of the world. You know, when I made this class or when I came into teaching this class, I really thought to myself, I cared a lot about creating a space where my students could actually tell explicitly the way ethics was shaping their world and were enabled to actually sort of speak to how they wanted to see that changed or to see how they made sense of that reality. And I hope that you've all felt empowered or enabled to share with me your opinions on these subjects, to share where you thought maybe I mischaracterized things. And I know so many of you have reached out and talked to me about your experience, where you're moving through this class, where you're moving through ideas, and I've just really appreciated that. If you did not feel enabled or did not feel empowered, I also still in asking you if you're willing to tell me what I could do to make a space going forward where students are more able to do those things. I've tried to make it accessible. I've tried to hold you accountable. I've tried to be understanding, and I've tried to create a positive experience for all of you. You know, I know some of you had to take ethics. For some of you, it is a class that you are seeking long term on a quest towards a certificate, an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree. I know a lot of you thought the topic was interesting, and I also am cognizant of things that I need to do to keep the class sexy, so to say, so that students are willing to take it and that we can continue to provide ethics here at this college. And I also just want to say, I am thankful, I feel so privileged, and I'm grateful for all of you. But if you ever need letters of recommendation, or if you're ever struggling later as a student, if you ever need people to write recommendations for school, for work, those are things that I am more than happy to provide for you. If you see me on campus, either at this campus or at Ohio State, where I also work full time in the medical center, I just recognize that this is really one of the last times that I'm going to be able to force you to watch my video and to listen to me talk to you. And so I want to make sure that I get in those gratitudes while I can, because it means a lot to me to also recognize that I only get to do these things because students like you sign up for this class and are willing to listen to me tell you about what philosophers have been thinking about for hundreds of years. And it also requires you all being vulnerable enough and willing to engage every week discussion board posts to demonstrate your understanding of material through things like quizzes. None of this is possible without you, and I want to take a moment to recognize that. This week, there is not so much stuff that I need to write out on a board, so it's going to be a little more intimate. I'm just going to be talking to you like I did very early on in the semester, like with our syllabus TLDR. But we're sort of coming in now towards the end of the semester, at the end of the ethics class. You have a few major assignments left. I've tried to think about how much reading is really appropriate as we walk into a heavy exam and project season. I hope that you have taken that opportunity to have a little less reading, to have a little less video watch time, and you've been able to start thinking about your final project and your final exam. Remember that final project, there's a separate video for you if you want to know more about what I'm expecting from all of you, but that's obviously a major chunk of your grade. For your final exam, there is a resource available back in Module 4 and also in the course home, where I gave you the template or the outline for the things that are going to be on that exam, trying to balance both those learning objectives set by the state, so that way I can make sure you all get credit for this class to make sure that when you transfer, if you do transfer to a four-year college, that those credits transfer with you. Obviously, like all of these things are important that I have to incorporate into that exam. But also, I made a conscious effort, and if you haven't seen the study guide yet, I would recommend you go look at it. But in that document, I list out those goals that you all set out in that first discussion board post, where you said, here is what I want to learn in ethics. And I hope that over the semester I've enabled you to be able to do those goals that you all articulated yourself. And sort of as a final way to ensure I've been able to do those things, that is going to actually just be the thing that I ask you on your exam. It's like one person set this goal. Can all of you do this thing that this person said they wanted to do? You have to then show me in the exam that you're able to do that. I would expect for that final exam that your responses have to be more thorough than they would have been, for example, on the quiz. I've articulated that expectation on that template. I will before the exam, and I'm doing it here now. Please, please, please don't expect that you're going to be able to answer in like minimal words big major ideas, like explaining huge concepts that are semester long ideas in one or two sentences, because it's just sort of the style of the exam that I need to demonstrate a semester's worth of mastery over content. You also have those two discussion board posts. So you have to do the applied moral theory discussion. That is going to be the content in this last lecture. You don't have a reading this week, and part of why you don't have a reading is because I know all of this stuff is coming at you. So I want to be cognizant of that, and I'm able to give you this content here and now without needing to make you go read from our textbook or from any other source, really. You also have, finally, that discussion that's a review for the final exam. I want to give you all a space to earn credit for preparing for that exam. It is important that you are able to perform in that exam, that you're able to clearly demonstrate to me and others who are going to be assessing this exam to make sure that the quality of this course has instructed you properly towards our learning objectives. That all being said, I'm going to now turn to talk to you about what we're doing this last week, this last topic, this last module. Wishing you all luck on these assignments. I'm hoping that there are enough resources for you to complete these assignments successfully. If you have any questions, reach out to me over email. If you have any questions in the future about things I can do to support you as a student, even if you're not my student anymore, please reach out to me. You can reach out to me through this institution's email, but if I'm not teaching here anymore, you should still be able to reach me at shayrossing@gmail.com. That is sort of the email that follows me beyond any institution. Just make sure you're clarifying, hey, I was your student in this class at this university at this time, and I need a letter of recommendation, and I'll be able to then do that thing successfully while also remembering and reviewing who you were and how you performed as a student, so I can give you the best possible recommendation or something like that, you know. Think back quickly to this semester and how it started. You know, there was a few weeks of what we called applied ethics, then we turned to normative ethics, and here we are in this final unit. We are thinking about this class at large as a semester-long project we've completed. We completed those topics in applied ethics, business ethics, and medical ethics or bioethics. We also looked at the trolley problem that first week, which is this famous philosophy dilemma. And you all created things. You created discussion board responses, you completed quizzes, you did readings, you watched lectures, you started thinking about topics. And what I did is I asked you to tell me your intuitions about the ethical thing to do, what was the right and wrong thing to do, and you gave me responses. I wanted you all to sort of to confront your intuitions about ethics. Before I told you how the philosophers or the professionals, so to say, have thought about these ideas for the last hundreds of years. I actually think that that is a super cool thing that I was able to bring forward to this class, is that a lot of the times we tell you in college how to think and then have you go and think with examples in the real world. If any of you ever take a math class, or even if you take logic or critical thinking here, you know, I would have you look at an argument or look at a math problem. I would show you how one completes the math problem, or how one completes the analysis of the argument. And then I would give you a bunch of practice problems, or I'd have you find arguments in the real world. And clearly, to some extent, that still happened, right? I said, here is this philosophical dilemma. These interesting things are happening here with ethics. And I want you to think about the ways these things might be interpreted as a person who has views about ethics. But I did not tell you, so to say, the formulas of how to complete those problems. There is no shortage of philosophers and thinkers and philosophy instructors and all of these sort of things, and professors who are more than willing to tell you how to make sense of the world. What I think is important, though, and what is valuable in a class like ethics, is that I not so much teach you how to make sense of the world, but I sort of expose you to the world, watch how you make sense of it, and then put you into dialogue with the way other people have dealt with the same questions that you would be dealing with, so that you could both compare yourself to see ways you are different from the ways people thinking of the field or thinking of the topics, but also so maybe you can have language finally to say, maybe you really thought, hey, I think it's more important to think about the consequences of people's actions, and we should think less about actions when we're thinking about the right thing or wrong thing to do. You probably never had heard the word consequentialist before, and I'm not exactly certain that you are going to need to know. Philosophers call that way of thinking consequentialism. But now, if you ever wanted to learn more about consequentialist thought, you have a word, you can look it up online, you can read all of the arguments for and against consequentialism, and you also had to, as matter of this class, do the thing of engaging with consequentialism in euthanasia, in sweatshops, in the trolley problem, in the idea of lying as clinicians. You had to deal with the utilitarian thief problem. You dealt with the experience machine. All of these sort of ways that you have to put the way you make sense of the world were put onto pressure in this class. And you had to tell me how you were going to respond to your ideas being put to pressure. And so you have now a selection of ways you made sense of the world in those first weeks of applied ethics. You told me how you were going to reckon through euthanasia. You told me how sweatshops was impacting your thinking. You told me how you would decide the trolley problem. I suspect that the way you responded was relevantly similar to theory in this class. That is to say, if you remember in this last lecture, I said, look, we have these three theories. One looked at the action, one looked at its consequences, and one looked at how that action impacted you or represented you as a person. And if you look at your response, I suspect you're somewhere in one of these three camps, right? We had students who, we'll take the sweatshop example, who said, sweatshop labor is so unethical, we could not ever justify supporting sweatshops, buying from sweatshops, allowing sweatshops to continue. We must regulate them out of existence. Then there were students who said, we actually sort of need to think about the impacts of this on autonomy. We have to think about the ways that we're going to be taking away people's jobs. Sure, sweatshops are not ideal situations, but the fact is that sweatshops are at large, despite being themselves unethical, the consequences of sweatshops, that is, the things they provide these people, are just sort of things that we need to justify in the world, and we need to think about the ramifications of our actions. That's what's important here. And then there are even students here who said, how does engaging in sweatshop labor actually reflect on us as consumers? What does it mean to me as a consumer to say, I don't care that this was made by children in gruesome conditions? Or even there were students who also said something like, what does this mean about America? What does this mean about our country? That we are the type of country that is willing to offshore labor in order to sort of create rather than create products at home with our own economic conditions. What does it mean about us as a nation that we are willing to offshore these jobs and are willing to allow children to be put through these gruesome conditions so that we might have cheaper products? These were all ideas that you all raised. And what's so cool about that is these theories that we've confronted that are looking at the act itself, that are looking at the consequence of the action, or looking at the agent, that is the person who performs the action, all of you were somewhere in these camps in your responses. So that's the first part of this. I want you to, in all of these examples, and I would read the instructions for the discussion, post precisely, because that is going to be where the exact instructions are. My point here in lecture is to sort of give you the context going into that discussion. But I want you to pinpoint exactly where it is that you found yourself kind of thinking more like utilitarian. Maybe you said you would pull the lever and you would be willing to take on the act of allowing some person to pass because you knew it would save more lives. You cared about the action. You care about the action that would maximize the amount of pleasure or happiness for the most amount of people, which would be presumably staying alive. Some of you might have said something like, I don't know how I could live with myself, and then maybe it was reflective on your character. Or some of you said, I just don't believe that we should ever be allowed to kill or commit murder, right? For some of you, that was a religious position. Some of you, that was just ethical. For some of you, it was both. For some of you, it was neither. But there were some of you who were interested in the duty here around this, right? So I almost want you to just sort of say, hey, look, on this thing, I had this sort of response. On that thing, I had that sort of response. I actually think it's kind of interesting to think about why is it that in some cases, this is how I make sense of the world, but in other places I think about it this way. There's sort of two ways you can confront that reality, which is most of us are not ethically consistent, especially people who are not philosophers full time, because that is sort of the goal of being a philosopher is you get more theories to make your views consistent. Um, we're not very good at it, but that is sort of the idea. But a lot of us are contradictory, right? A lot of us believe things that contradict. A lot of us hold things that don't make sense together. A lot of us are not great at, in every single case, holding the same belief. We are impacted by experiences, by contexts, by really hard hypotheticals that's almost impossible to imagine ourselves being in. All of these shape the way that we would all respond to things like a discussion board post asking you, how would you deal with the trolley problem? Right? Like this is obviously a difficult thing to make analysis in. But it invites you the opportunity to ask yourself, how can I be a person who has thought more rationally about these things? And what do I really value? There's this Greek philosopher, Aristarchus, and I kind of want to tell you, his story. Aristarchus creates the heliocentric model. This is in ancient Greece. This is in ancient Athens. This is thousands of years before Copernicus or before Galileo. This is a early belief that the sun is in the center of the universe. Okay, and there was a majoritarian opinion, at least at this time in this culture, that the Earth was at the center of the universe and that the sun sort of rotated around the Earth. Aristarchus, his ideas were rejected because there was this feeling that it would be implausible that the sun was at the center of the universe and that all of the other stars were just like the sun, because that would mean all of the other stars were so far away that the universe was almost infinitely large. And the people could not imagine that the universe could be that large. It seemed implausible that the world could be that big. And so they took on a belief that was wrong because they were scared about what the right belief would mean for how they make sense of the world and their place inside of it. I share that story because it tells me something about our human nature. Or at least I suppose it does, and you can disagree with me. But I really do believe that there are times like this where we are confronted by an implausible belief. We might be confronted by, in our example here in ethics, being a person interested in duties and obligations when it comes to medical ethics, but thinking more practically or functionally or thinking really in a utilitarian sense when it comes to something like business and sweatshops. And when we confront that reality, we can either accept that in some space we have to believe something implausible. We might have to think about literally changing the way we understand our universe. You might have to radically recompose how big and difficult and unimaginable the world is around you when you confront these ethical theories butting heads to head. And you sort of have to make a decision about how is my universe going to change? That is really the second part of this discussion post. I want you to tell me, now that I see, in some cases I believe this, in others I believe this, here's how I'm going to reckon with that. Maybe you don't have to maybe you don't have to be a utilitarian in every case. I'm not acting like you have to choose one of our theories and this theory will explain every case. Maybe you really think there is something about the business world that changes the rules of how we are supposed to act with one another. It is just a different environment, and we all know that when we enter the business world. This is something you can say. Or maybe you say something like, I was wrong. It really seemed wrong to me that I could ever justify sweatshops. But when I really think about the theories we talked about, when I think about having to look at the arguments and counter arguments for theories that look at the acts themselves versus the consequences of actions, I was wrong. And I really think that in order to be a person who is more rational, who has thought more holistically through my opinions, I have to change my opinion, and here's where I stand now. That's also really. But what you're doing is you're doing the thing the Athenian society would not do. You're willing to reimagine a universe radically unlike the universe you thought existed when you came into this classroom. I think that's kind of cool. I have changed my opinions as an ethicist. I've changed my opinions on things that I've published about. I've changed my opinions in the last few weeks about things that I thought I knew more about, and I have, if nothing else, had my opinions confronted vigorously. Part of becoming an adult, going through college, in my experience, had to learn being okay with allowing my universe to change sometimes. But just because something is hard or difficult or unimaginable does not mean you should allow your universe to remain limited or unchanged. Because what you do when you do that is you're the Athenians. You are the people who look at an idea that was actually right, but because you were afraid of how that would change how you made sense of the world, you were willing to be wrong and to shun the right idea. I hope that metaphor made sense for you. I hope that that's something helpful for you as you complete this task, as you have to now go back and look at what you said and then deal with the ways that we are often at times contradicting. If you were a person who had a perfect response to every single question, I applaud you. I was not that student at all. I found myself, when I came into this world of philosophy, full of opinions that were contradictory, hard to reckon with. And what has been so valuable for me over these years of ethics is really trying to deal with and reckon how I make sense of the world. And I hope that you're able to do some of that here as we sort of close our class. Obviously, you need to go read the instructions in that discussion for a much more clean and precise instruction. But I hope you can sort of see what we're trying to do here. You had to do applied ethics, then you learn normative theories, and now what I'm having you do is I want you to use these normative theories as tools to analyze your first intuitions about applied ethics and see how having learned those theories has changed them. Think about how, now that you've looked at the aspects of beliefs, acts, consequences of acts, and agents, think about the ways that your opinions might have been contradictory, and I want you to tell me now how you deal with it. I think this is really cool. I hope you all appreciate this. Like, you are in some way able to speak to a time capsule of yourself and your beliefs and say, I know why you thought that, but here's where I am now. And maybe you're still in the same place. And maybe now you're trying to think about how the world does contradict with each other. And I also hope that that's a skill that enables you to think about why people disagree with you. Maybe they are people who think more about the consequences of actions. And while that's not you, you have a greater appreciation of people who think that way after completing this course. If you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to me. I hope this has been helpful for you and this class has been formative for you. And that being said, I wish you all good luck on these final weeks. Thank you.